announcement. So now we're going to talk about the fly rail. And just, as an introduction into all of this, we're just talking about the fly rail. We're not even really talking about the counterweight system in general. My issues are with operation at the rail. In my experience, this is where the danger is. This is the area where I don't have any hard facts for this, but anecdotally, I believe that we are seeing more injuries and fatalities at the fly rail during counterweight rigging operations than we do in any other area of our industry. We don't all get to hear about it because a lot of it does happen in elementary, sometimes elementary, but mostly secondary, high school, middle school, small colleges, small semi-professional locations. It's a very dangerous place, and if you're not paying attention all the time, and if you're not focused, if you haven't planned properly, if you don't have the right communication, all of those things are going to add up to creating a problem for you. And as I guess some of you probably know, once you get into a dangerous condition in a fly rail system, typically a runaway, there's no stopping it and there's no going back. And it happens very, very quickly. There should be, and Sarah, will you help me out here? If I would love to do if there's a hand wave function, right? Over on, that everybody should have?
There is. There's a way to raise your hand if you, it's in the chat. Oh crap, I used to know where it was.
I saw it earlier, but now I've lost it. Maybe if somebody else knows where it is, you could tell us less informed folks. I think,
says Robert Haycock.
It's in reactions.
Reactions?
Yes, reactions.
Reactions. More. I can't find reactions.
If you go under participants, it'll list all the names, and at the bottom there's invite, mute me, and raise hand.
Oh, I don't have that. I get invite, mute all, and more.
Oh, that's because we're the hosts, Bill.
Yeah.
We don't have that
I can't raise my hand. All right, so you all can raise your hand. I'm curious to see how many of you have been involved with a runaway accident, or have, directly or indirectly, like been in the room when that has happened. So look at that. We have more than a couple. Did any of you, those of you who are raising your hand, did any of you think that this was a fun thing to have happen? Okay. Victor, if you're talking, unfortunately, we still can't hear you. I can't hear you. I don't know if anyone else can, but I cannot. Yeah. Okay. Moving on. No one can. No one can hear. Okay, no one can hear you, Victor. We're really sorry, but it appears to be with you. All right. So without further ado, let's get into this. Runaway accidents, which are out of balance accidents, are the biggest issue, the biggest problem that we have, and they cause, as I say, the most injuries and fatalities. I unfortunately am the one many times who the insurance company or the attorney or the faculty member or whatever call me to talk about accidents after they've happened. I would really like to not have to deal with these anymore because they're not fun and they're not pretty. Okay. I also have a personal issue or personal account for dealing with runaway accidents because I was involved in one on one of the very, very first installation jobs in my career in 1979. And I was hit by a counterweight, a 2-inch brick, 2-inch by 6-inch brick that fell about 70 feet. Didn't hit me directly, obviously. I'm still here. Hit the floor and bounced and hit me on the leg. It was not a good thing, and it took a long time to recover from that. And so, I have a personal interest in this. If we have time at the end of the session, I will tell you that whole story, because it's a bit, and it serves as a really, really, really good example of what you should never, ever, ever do. But I was young and foolish. The 3 best ways to maintain a safe fly rail operation are by following those 3 words in front of you. Planning. You have to know what every step, what every action you take, what steps are going to happen after that. Some of you may know my friend Rocky Paulson, who is, or was, he's retired, but who was, one of the preeminent arena riggers in the United States, if not the world. And he had a saying that one of the things that you should never, ever, ever hear a rigger say is, "What's next?" Because when you say "what's next," that implies that you don't know, which means you did not plan. And you need to plan from start to finish, because you need to know what's going to happen every step of the way. That way you can avoid accidents. And if something does go wrong, you have an instantaneous awareness that something that you had planned didn't go the way you had planned. Focus. We'll get into this in more detail when we do some operational stuff in a few minutes. But, you can't lose focus. You gotta be fixated on what you are doing. Working the rail, loading weights, loading scenery, lighting, whatever, out on the pipe. You have to maintain that focus. Once you get distracted, either by another operation that is going on upstage, downstage view or something, or your buddy walks into the room, any of that stuff, the opportunity for an accident it goes through the roof. I mean, it's very easy. For example, when you turn your head to look at your friend who just walked in the room, and your hand, instead of grabbing the rope on set number 19, grabs the rope on set number 20, and set number 19 was a little bit out of balance, now you have the start of a runaway. It's very, very simple things. It can be complex things, but maintaining focus is extremely important. And as I said, I'm going to show you ways that we lose that focus on occasion. Communication clearly is extraordinarily important. Maintaining the appropriate communication between crew, the various members of that crew, whether it's a deck crew, the fly person, the people on the loading bridge, the loaders, the appropriate communication needs to be in place. For example, just as in my experience, when you have a counterweight system with, I don't know, let's say 30 line sets, and on the rail, they are numbered 1 through 30. 30, each line set is, it's given a specific number starting at downstage. But there are gaps in the sail. There's, you might in the system, you might have a line set, line set, line set, and then a gap where there is no line set, and then the next line set starts after that. Okay, so it's further away from the previous line set. On the rail, on the floor, they numbered all the line sets 1 through 30. Somebody was kind enough to go up to the loading bridge and number up there also, but they didn't number the line sets, they numbered every space. So you had 1 through 35. Because as soon as they numbered a space, then that didn't, your line sets no longer aligned with the numbering down at the locking rail. Sounds like a simple fix. Sounds like something that common sense and really should happen. It happens a lot. It happens a significant amount of time, all with the best intentions, of course. All right, so we're gonna use these 3 words as our primary theme throughout the day. As I mentioned, we're not going to get into overall counterweight systems. We're talking about operation at the rail. For the purposes of this class, I'm going to assume that we've all run a counterweight system and that we all know that we don't fight gravity. You know, if we're loading up a line set with lighting equipment, we're going to bring the batten in, load the batten with the lighting equipment before the loaders on the bridge put weights on the in the counterweight arbor. If that's an inappropriate assumption, if you're not sure of what I'm talking about, or if I start talking about something that you're not familiar with throughout this this class, please either do it, you know, throw something in chat, or you know, just turn on your mic and go for that. Okay. All right, I'm just checking the chat here. Yes, gravity it's not a good idea. It's a rule. And you know, and and one of the things that I'm fond of hearing people say that we work when we, you know, with what we do as riggers, we defy gravity. There ain't no way in hell we're ever going to defy gravity. Gravity is going to win every single time. Our goal is to work with gravity, not defy it, because you're just not going to do that. So with all of that, what I want to start off with is talking about components of the system and the safety equipment, the safety materials, the safety hardware that's in the equipment. And I think if I've loaded this up properly, oh look, a counterweight system. Isn't that pretty? Let's see if I can make that a little bit bigger for everybody. Do-de-do-de-do-de-do. So what we're dealing with is over here, all here. Okay. Sarah, just so you know, the chat does not show up automatically when on my screen. So if somebody is put something in there, you might want to let me know. So let's start with our friend, the Counterweight Arbor. And we have 2 varieties, 3 if you want to count the new front-loading arbors that Brick House Fly Systems have created. I was going to get into those today because it's a 90-minute session. Does anybody have a Brick House front-loading counterweight rigging system in their house, in their venue? Robert, do you like? You can. Why don't you unmute, Robert? Do you like it? Is it?
Yeah, in general, we like it. So we have a variety of systems in the same building. You go across the hall and we have a more traditional system, and then in our larger space, we have the front-loading arbor. It does have some issues. We had a really early model of that system, and from what I've seen, some of their later revisions to the system appear to have solved some of the problems that we have with it. We had some issues with the fit of the bricks in our arbor because we have some odd sizing requirements,
Right.
And we had some issues with the fit of the keeper bar and the latching mechanism, and that, like I said, they've kind of, as far as I know, entirely redesigned that for the systems that they're installing now, and it seems to have resolved that.
So you got beta tested, is what you got, right?
Essentially, we do that a lot.
Okay, well, somebody's got to do it. Thank you. All right. To answer your question, Andrew, I think the best thing for you to do, rather than get into that here, because you know it is a really different animal. Thern, T-H-E-R-N, is the company that makes them. The brand name, I think they're still calling it Brick House. Wenger has them. They're a dealer. You should go take a look. Go online and take a look and see what that looks like. So I'm going to go over to our more traditional counterweight arbors. We have two of them, a single purchase and a double purchase. For our purposes today, there is no difference because the safety systems within these arbors are the same for whether it's a single purchase or a double purchase system. The important thing to remember for a host of reasons is that if you're working with a double purchase system, you're doubling the weight. So you're dealing with significantly more, a larger number of bricks, more weight in a double purchase system. And it's marginally easier to get yourself into trouble quicker. Let me just move on here and see what the next slide is. All right. So as I said, we have the safety systems within the traditional counterweight arbors are the same, whether or not they're single purchase or double purchase. So we're going to talk about the safety issues, the safety components in them. And the first and foremost is this bad boy right here, which is a locking collar, sometimes called a weight hold down collar, locking collar. It goes by various names depending on manufacturer and the part of the country you're in. That collar's job, and its only job, is to be placed down on top of the counterweight stack after you're finished loading or unloading the stack. You put that collar down and you tighten up the whether it's a thumb screw or in this case is a handle here. You just tighten it up. You tighten it up by hand. There's no tool required unless you have a really, really old one. Some of them have stove bolts in them and it requires a flathead screwdriver. My recommendation for that is to get rid of those and get a wing, a thumb screw, or possibly one of these larger plastic handles that allow you to grip the bolt better. But it needs to be down on top of the counterweight stack tight. No gap in between the top of the stack and the collar at all times. The only time that it's not in place is when you have raised up. And when you have raised up, is this the picture? Nope, that's the broken one. All right. There is an issue. I'll find that photo in a minute. But when you're loading or unloading weights, you're going to take the two collars, you put them up here on the rod somewhere, you bring the spreader plates up with it, and you hold them up there in some fashion. People typically use a spring clamp or a bulldog type clamp, just to keep them up out of the way while you're loading or unloading weights. Assuming that you have appropriate communication with your deck chief. When you are done your activity, loading or unloading, your responsibility is to notify the deck chief that you're done. You are not done until you have taken the spreader plates and the locking collars and place them back down on top of the counterweight stack. Now, again, sounds like common sense. Not as an aside, but my company does. We're the leading inspection company in North America. We do, we do hundreds of them a year. So you don't write you don't write out every report. You develop a template or a list of templates of things that you regularly find, so that you can cut and paste and put those in. Right? It saves time when you're writing a report. The number one item on that template are the locking collars. They are almost never in place. I would, at least 75% of the time, they are loose. And if they are loose, they will do nothing. They will not assist you at all. Their job, as I say, is to keep these weights from popping out of there. When you have a runaway, let's say you're pipe heavy and your arbor takes off on you and is now traveling up to the top stop, which is 55 feet away. Just how fast do you think that's going to be going when it hits the top stop up there? It's going to be booking right along. And when it hits and crashes into that top stop, it stops because the stop, that stop bar, the stop batten, that's what it's called. It'll do its job and it'll stop. But these weights, if given the opportunity, will keep going and they will pop right up and right out of that arbor. And, you know, not to make too big of a deal about it, that's why I got hit. That's, you know, we had a runaway on stage, and a weight came out of the arbor. The arbor had gone up, and a weight came out of it. More details on that later. You will, in more modern systems, probably the last 10 to 15 years, you will find that most of the manufacturers have welded the front locking collar to a spreader plate. And that's okay, that's fine. You know, that means that that spreader plate and that locking collar will sit down tight on top of the stack, and its offstage brother will also sit down tight. But you're also going to find down, you know, in older systems where that wasn't a common practice, where the locking collar is not attached to a spreader plate. That's fine also. It just gives you a little bit more to think about. In this case, where you can see where the locking collar has been welded, attached to the spreader plate, then you know that that spreader plate has to sit on top of the arbor stack. Okay? There's not much to it as far as this is concerned. The locking collars have to be tight down on the stack whenever you are finished, whether it's loading or unloading. There's no ifs, ands, or buts on this. There's no maybes. It's the way it's got to be. So that's a locking collar. The next victim in our counterweight arbor is the spreader plate, represented by these dark lines right here, of which there are 3 in this particular arbor. Now, we have learned over the years through trial and error. And when I say trial and error, remember that, you know, we're talking about accidents here. We are not talking about any research and, you know, and development. There's no R&D in this part of the industry. At least there hasn't been. Trial and error is the way we have learned our lesson, and we've discovered our mistakes over the years. But we have learned that we need at least 1 spreader plate for every 2 vertical feet of arbor. So let's just assume that this is an 8-foot arbor. You know, I need a plate for every 2 feet. So I need 3 plates. And what those plates do, you know, as most of you I hope know, and if you're not familiar with it, then let me know. But these plates, they just ride in the arbor. It's a flat plate, it's 2 inches wide, got a hole towards each end, one on stage, one off stage, and large enough to allow the plate to loosely ride up and down in the arbor. The plate's job is to keep this arbor, especially in, you know, the middle 2/3 of the arbor, but in this area here, its job is to keep these arbor rods from bending in the event of an out of balance accident. When that arbor goes screaming, it doesn't matter whether it goes up or down, whichever direction it's going, it's screaming on up there, slams into the top stop. Then these arbor rods go through a chemical transformation, and instead of being a 5/8 steel rod, now they're linguini, and they bend, and they bend out. You know, they will belly out. I need another mouse so I can do an appropriate belly here. This one will go that way. This guy will go that way. And if allowed to do that, then the weights that are in the stack are no longer being held by the arbor rods, and they fall out. And when they fall out, they come crashing down right at you. Okay? So we need to make sure that, that the spreader plates are placed appropriately throughout the arbor. This is a relatively new, relatively new practice. Michael Powers, what do you think about last 10 years or so? You do a bunch of installs. You did some for me.
Not anymore, of course. I'm retired. But
Well.
yeah, the last 10 years.
Not the last 10 years. We started seeing the arbor manufacturers putting a label. This is the backbone here of the arbor. And they're putting a label. It says, you know, get a label here. It says, place spreader plate here. And want to place spreader plate there. And that's all well and good if you have enough spreader plates. But with the older arbors, it was kind of hit or miss how many spreader plates they were going to give you. And with the really old arbors, you know, like the ones that are, you know, from the turn of the last century that you might still find on Broadway, they didn't have any spreader plates. So you're left with some decisions to make. But let's start with the basic premise that these plates keep these rods from bending. And if these rods don't bend, the weights can't fall out. If the rod can bend, the weight is going to fall out. And in a really unlucky situation, enough weight will fall out. Now, we started off with an out of balance condition, which let the arbor, let's say, comes screaming down to the floor, hits the floor batten, rods bend out, weights fall out. The pipe, with whatever weight it does or, you know, didn't, you know, whether it had any weight on it or not, that has gone up and smacked either into the grid or the loft blocks, right? So now these arbor rods bend out, the weights fall out. Now you're batten heavy because you've now lost all your counterweight. It's fallen out of the arbor. So second phase of this accident has the pipe starting to come back down and the arbor heading back up. And eventually, as it travels north, it starts to book right along. In a worst case scenario, the empty arbor now smashes into the top stop. The batten on stage is now being shock loaded for the second time. The first time is when it's smashed into the grid or into the loft blocks, and you shock loaded the wire rope and, more importantly, whatever you were using to terminate the hardware, the fittings that were terminating the wire rope. You know, so that's number one. That's the first shock load. Then the arbor goes up, batten comes down. The shock load hits those fittings again. Guess what, folks? Those fittings are now going to fail. So now the batten the batten snaps all the fittings. It's no longer connected to anything. So it lands on the floor, taking the weight of the batten off of the system. So now, even though it's an empty arbor, it's now heavier than everything else. So the crowning indignity, phase 3, is the arbor now comes screaming back down to the floor. Right? This is not a scenario that you want to be involved in. So spreader plates, extremely important. They should be stacked. They should be placed in the stack every 2 feet, where you should have at least enough plates to do that. Should you fill the arbor, which, you know, isn't all that uncommon. But let's talk for a minute about those situations where you're working in a theater that has an 8-foot arbor, but it only has 2 spreader plates. It doesn't have the required 3. It's an older arbor, and they didn't know better. So now what you need to do is you need to determine how much weight you're going to put in that arbor and do a little math so that you can put the plates in the arbor stack and distribute those plates so you're splitting the stack of weight into thirds. You're putting a couple of a plate, you know, however many, you know, like, let's say 18 inches up, you put a plate, you put more weights on top. And then another 18 inches, you put another weight. If you're going to fill the arbor and you only have 2 plates and it's an 8-foot arbor, then you're going to have one at like 2'6", 2'6", and you know, and that all you can do. But you're breaking up, you're distributing the plates evenly within the stack of weight. I hope that's clear. It's a little hard to describe just staring at this this little elevation here. Hang on one second. I'm going to go over to the chat here. Let's see. All right. First of all, Michael, I have not seen the brick house. I assume that they are, you know, R&D, that they're doing this on purpose. If Rick is holding on to him, tell him to get him off of his laptop and onto an online platform, please. So go yell at him, Michael. David Owen. Yes, there are spreader plates. If you don't have enough plates in your arbor, say you need 3, you only have 1 or 2, then the way to add another plate in there, one is very time consuming and a pain in the ass actually, is you have to take the arbor apart and then put a new plate in. There is a gentleman named Steve Reese who just retired from one of the upstate SUNY system universities. He was a professor up there, and he developed and patented what's called a retro spreader. And that is indeed what, David, you are referring to. Yes, they are as effective as the traditional plates. If you want to see what they look like, I believe, and Sarah, if you have a moment, if you could, if you want to go to our website, we should have a retro spreader in the catalog.
Yep, give me a minute.
Okay. Mark Stevens, Runaway Aftermath, what components are typically replaced besides the obvious? All the, well, and this is a bit of an aside here, but all terminations, both sides of the lift lines, I don't care what they are. They're, you know, wire rope clips, compression sleeves, crazy glue, don't really care. They get replaced. Lift lines typically do not need to be replaced unless the shock has been, I mean, it's been so magnificently out of balance that it has created a visible shock to the wire rope, and that'll be manifested at what we call a bird cage or a core pop, where the wire rope looks like it has untwisted itself and kind of spread out, looks like it has exploded. It takes a bit to do that in a typical runaway situation. And I don't mean for that to be as a challenge. Okay. So how do I click to download? Okay. Click to open. Jesus, this is being, there it is. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. If it's, does that show on my screen, Sarah?
Yes, it does.
Oh, good.
It's visible.
Yeah, so, you know, 2 bolts. Hold the 2 pieces together, you pivot, arbor rod, it sandwiches around the arbor rod and has the same effect as a standard plate. Okay? So just to recap on the spreader plates, you want to make sure that you are distributing them properly, however many of them you have. You're distributing them evenly throughout the weight stack. Many times I'll see a theater, they use a spreader plate to identify pipe weight, pipe weight, empty batten weight, which is usually only 2 or 3 bricks. That is a waste of the spreader plate. It is the wrong place by far for the spreader plate to be located. The arbor rods, they may bend down here, but they're not going to billow out. They're not going to bend out and allow a weight to fall out. They'll typically bend, both of them in the same direction, down this low. It's only when you get up where you have more distance, more span between top and bottom, where they tend to belly out. Don't waste a spreader plate by putting it on top of pipe weight. It's just a waste. Make sure that you are spreading them out evenly throughout the weight stack. There are other ways of identifying pipe weight. Painting the front edge, the onstage edge of the brick is always a good idea. And some people will band strap the weights, making sure that nobody accidentally takes off too many bricks when they're unloading. Okay, I think I may have beaten that into submission. One other thing I want to point out are these guide shoes, and this particular image is of what Wenger calls their universal guide shoe. One of the things I want you to be aware of is that there should not be any wear. There should be no wear and tear on these guide shoes. They don't carry weight. That's not their job. Their job is to travel in that guide track, whether it's a T-track or an aluminum J-guide, just to travel in that track to keep the arbor from flapping in the breeze. You don't want an arbor that can move from side to side and potentially hit its next door neighbor and pick up a brick and knock it off of that next door neighbor. You don't want that to happen, right? For a whole host of reasons. If you are experiencing a situation where your guide shoes are showing wear and tear, there is something wrong with the alignment of your system. Either it's in the T-track. I don't know what's going on with me today. But either it's in the T-track itself, or it's the placement of the T-track relative to the head block overhead. Typically, especially in a T-track system, the T's themselves, those guide tracks that run up to the ceiling, are only 20 feet long, and you'll have 2 or 3 splices. And those splices typically either the installers weren't too careful when they put them in, or they've gotten out of alignment over the years. And you'll know about it. Most of you have felt, as you're running an arbor out, and you'll feel and hear a kind of a thump as you're pulling it along. You feel it in the hand line, and you'll hear it, and then you'll hear it again, a half a second or a second later, and it's the top guide shoe hitting a misaligned splice, and then the bottom guide shoe hitting the misaligned splice. You want to take care of that, because if you create enough wear in your guide shoes so that it gets too sloppy in there, then your arbor is free to move from side to side, especially on the onstage side of it. And it'll move from side to side, and you do run the risk of having it hit one of its next door neighbors. And Murphy's Law says that if you hit one of those, that will be the one where they forgot to tighten up the locking collars. And you have the ability to literally pick up one of these weights and knock it out of the arbor, okay? So you want to keep an eye on it. You don't want to ignore it. You don't want to pull harder if it's a tough pull in a particular section of the track. You're pulling along, and then when it gets about 18 feet off the floor, you got to pull it a little harder for a bit. There's something wrong there in that alignment, and you need to check it out, because it will eventually wear on the guide shoes, and it will create a problem. Okay, how are we doing here? No more chat stuff? Okay. So, that's kind of where I'm at on a counterweight arbor. I wanted to show you some pictures. I'm not sure how obvious these are. This one is not obvious at all. Oh, I know why I did this one, because they used a safety cable instead of the locking collar to try and hold the weights down. Here's an arbor that had a crash up at the top. So this arbor went north, and it's just bent right in through here, okay? But the other reason I wanted to show you this arbor, this is an older arbor, probably in the 70s. Yeah, it would have to be in the 70s. and it's malleable iron. So given enough force, it can, and I've seen it done, it will fail right across the form here, the bend. And when it fails, you know, then you have parts raining down along with counterweight. Again, not a great idea. Here's another one that had a runaway, and that was their lockout, tag out lockout operation. You can see the guide shoe is now all jammed down there. This was a lightweight. This was not very much, not much happening here at all. Oh, here's one of my interesting pet peeves. This is a photo I was looking for earlier. We'll come in and we'll see an inspection. During an inspection, we'll find the spreader plate up here because it has been jammed up there when somebody was loading or unloading the weights, and they just never bothered to put it back down again. No. And you'll note on this one, given the age, these are stove bolts. These are round heads that have you need a slotted flathead screwdriver to tighten them up or loosen them up. Yeah, I didn't think this photo was going to work out real well. But this is a typical situation where we find spreader plates that are not used properly. And I'm not going to mention names, but when somebody comes in and hangs an orchestra shell, maybe it was done during the original installation, maybe 10 years later they bought an orchestra shell and they hung the ceiling pieces and they bury. You can't really see it, but all the spreader plates are right down there. Yeah, there's a little bit of a gap there, and all the spreader plates are down there. And this arbor, it's probably an 8-foot arbor. It's full. It is, as some of the installers in the group will attest, it is a royal pain in the butt to fix and takes way too much time. All right. So I want, there should have been a plate, right about here, probably another one up there. I'm assuming these are all 2-inch bricks, except for that guy there. All right. What's this one? Oh, another one of my favorites. They never bothered to put the thumb screws or the tightening bolt in there at all. And given the wear and tear on that system, it's been like that for, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 years. The really frightening thing, here's one more, and this is still a lightweight hit. I didn't have any real good photographs, and I didn't think it was really all that important to show you, the damage. But here's a relatively lightweight hit where the bottom stop angle took a pretty good shot. The frightening thing about this last group of photographs that I showed you, it's all from the same theater. It's an inspection that I did not too long ago, and I really hope that none of them are on this call. All right, so moving on. Your buddy, the rope block. If anybody has a question or about arbors, and before I move on, throw it into the chat now. Michael, to answer your question, it's sometimes difficult to tell the difference between malleable and cast iron. Malleable replaced cast iron in the late 60s. And we're talking about counterweight arbors. I'm sorry, folks. But Michael Powers asked the question, malleable or cast iron. Cast iron came first because that's what they knew to do. And we got a little bit better at it with malleable, which came in late 60s and lasted until the late 70s, early 80s, and we finally moved over to a fully steel counterweight arbor. Okay. No, it was on the East Coast. And I'm not mentioning names because they'll come after me. Here we have a rope block, a very standard, very North American style rope block. There's a picture of one. The only difference between the drawing that I just showed you and this one is this guy has the ubiquitous oval ring on it, which is designed to do things, to do two things: to keep the rope lock handle vertical in a locked position when it's not in use, and it's also designed to make as much noise as possible when you are operating the line set. Okay, so what's the big deal with rope locks? Let's go. I'm trying to decide which one's going to be easier to talk about here. I will go here for now because it's newer. Why not? So a rope lock is designed to carry 50 pounds of out of balance condition. And the reason that we have rope locks is that even in a perfectly balanced system where you have 200 pounds of scenery on the batten and 200 pounds of counterweight in the arbor, you're still not going to be balanced. You're not going to be in weight unless those two items, the arbor and the scenery, are at relatively the same height. Because the lift lines that are connecting the arbor to the batten are going to move. And the closer the arbor gets to the floor, the weight of the lift lines is transferring over to the arbor side. What all right, Andrew, hold on to that for a second. I'm going right there. Okay, and I would, Andrew, if you could, instead of sending these to me privately, hit your everyone button. That way everybody can see your question, so the answers aren't as vague. At any rate, what I was talking about was the transfer of weight. Just the lift lines themselves transfers weight. As one side of the system goes up, the weight is transferred to the other side of the system. That's why we have a rope lock. Otherwise, we wouldn't need one. So they're only designed to hold 50 pounds. And the way they do that, using our old Sequoia lock as our shining example here, there are, on this lock, there are 2 roll pins, one here and one right there. And they run through the housing, and hanging from those roll pins, there's a cast iron piece of metal here and another cast iron piece of metal. And they are literally hanging. There is nothing attaching them at the bottom, so they're loose. They're free to move, given the opportunity. So the way we adjust to make sure that the rope lock is holding the appropriate amount of weight, the 50 pounds, you can just barely see it back here, but there is a thumb screw that pushes against this device. Now, this piece of cast metal hanging here, for reasons that I don't know, is called a dog. So this, and let's look at this one here for a second. Better, it's better image here. Okay, so we've got this bolt. It's coming through the housing, it's threaded in there, so that when you tighten it up, it pushes against the offstage dog, pushing that offstage dog a little bit on stage. It fixes its position. It hangs free, but that dog will not, that bolt will not allow the dog to move further off stage. It'll just sit there in that position. This dog, the on-stage guy, it's hanging free, flapping in a breeze there. The rope is coming down through the middle. Oops, sorry. And the rope lock, the handle, when you disengage it, and the handle comes over on the side, and I looked for a photograph or a drawing to show you this, folks, but I could not find one. But when you pull the handle over, when you open the rope lock, the handle itself will have a bump on the inside. That bump is called a cam for you motorheads. And when you lock it, that cam pushes against that dog and moves it. So it pushes this dog, which pushes against the rope, which pushes against the offstage dog, compressing around the rope. That's how the lock holds the rope in place. If you want it to be looser, you would loosen up this bolt, move it off stage, or if you want it to be tighter, you would tighten it up. Relatively simple operation. Unfortunately, there are an awful lot of people who manage to mess this up. As I mentioned, 50 pounds is all that you want this rope lock to hold. When you put that handle up and that little cam pushes on the dog and causes that chain reaction of compression in here, you want that to hold 50 pounds. You don't want it to hold more than that. Right? The reason you don't want it to hold more than that is somebody has made a mistake and they're taking off too much weight or they're putting on too much weight. Then you want to know about it before it becomes an unmanageable size.
Bill, somebody has a question on how do you tell, what's the best way to test the rope lock for 50 pounds of resistance?
Okay, I was going to get to that. Okay, just
Well, I want to know now.
no, I appreciate it. I did not see that. And thank you, Mark Stave, for the verb definition. Michael Powers, I'm afraid I'm going to argue with that. Well, it depends on how. Okay. Nah, I would argue that. My experience, so we're going to go right to the how do you tell. You lock the lock, as Michael has suggested. Lock. Don't put the ring on. All right, so leave the ring flapping on top of the lock there, and then pull on the rope. And pull on it for all you are worth. If you can pull the rope through the lock, but it takes a significant amount of effort, and usually some sound is involved in this, usually a grunt or two, then you're going to be in the neighborhood of 50 pounds. If you pull on it with one arm and it moves, yes, I would agree, Michael, that the lock needs adjusting, because if you can pull on it with one arm and the rope pulls through the lock. Now remember, the handle is engaged, so this is a locked system. If you can just yank on it with one hand and you can pull the rope through the lock, it's too loose. Okay. If you can't pull it at all, it's too tight. Here's the big issue with this. These rope locks, when they are over tightened, can easily hold 200, 225 pounds. They don't think twice about it. So if you are in a situation where you are in an out of balance condition and you're not paying attention, you're not focused on what you are doing, and you just simply walk over there and unlock that thing, and you're 225 pounds out of balance, it's going to take off. And regretfully, 9 times out of 10, when it takes off, it takes the technician with it. This is one of our biggest problems. Is one of the reasons that I get to investigate accidents, is because people's reaction when they get into an out of balance condition is to try and stop it. They grab the rope. They think that they're going to, oh my God, they grab it and they're going to make it stop. Those of you in a teaching situation of any sort need to work with your staff, your students, your crew, and train that out of people. We don't want any heroes. It's easy to replace a runaway system. $3,000 to $4,000 typically is what it's going to take, right? I can't replace you that cheaply. So you got to learn not to do that. This is why we're looking for a 50-pound out of weight, a 50-pound maximum for the rope lock. We don't want it to be able to hold any more than that, because that way you don't get into trouble. If for some reason the loaders up on the bridge are busy loading counterweight on set number 19, but they've made a mistake and they're supposed to be loading on set number 20, and there's no weight on 19 yet, then they're going to load it to a point where it's going to start to move. Camille, I'll get to that in just a second. They're going to keep loading until it starts to move. I want that to be at 50 pounds. I don't want it to be at 100, 150, or 200 pounds. That's the trouble zone. At 50 pounds, somebody's going to notice it, or 60 pounds. Somebody is going to notice that the arbor is starting to move. Hopefully, everybody knows is the fly person on the deck who is supposedly paying attention. You know, the loaders certainly should know because they're putting weights into the arbor, but now the arbor is a little bit further away from them than it was a moment ago. You know, they got to reach down a little bit more. That's got to key in and tell them something's wrong. That's where the focus comes in. So just, you know, I don't know how to stress this enough. Rope locks have to be adjusted properly so that you stay out of trouble, so that you're not able to get into a condition that is going to cause serious harm, you know, or a fatality. Camille asks, what's the best way to train that grab reaction out of people? I debated this morning whether I was going to bring this up or not. I think that the only way that you can, well, the best way, pardon me while I stutter through this here. The best way to do it is to set up a scenario controlled situation where the line set is out of balance. But it should not be out of balance by 200 pounds. It should be out of balance by 25 pounds, 30, you know, something insignificant that is easily manageable so that when somebody opens up a rope lock, they see the arbor move without them helping. I mean, that's the key here. It has to become something that they're aware of, that they have seen before. If this is not something that has happened before, or they haven't had an opportunity to witness this in a practice scenario, their reaction, for whatever reason, I have no idea, the reaction is to grab on. But if they've seen it before, if they have practiced this in, you know, a controlled low weight situation, then they have the appropriate reaction. And what is that appropriate reaction? To run like hell, get out of the room. You know, if you're near the rail, then I would suggest you get to the other side of the stage. If you're mid-stage, get out of there. I have seen counterweight in an out of balance condition where the arbor has gone up to the top stop. I have seen weight bounce across a loading bridge, mess around and bounce around on the battens for a second or three, and land mid-stage. So clearly the situation calls for, you know, an evacuation. It's the only way I can put it. Okay, hopefully that explains that. I want to answer a couple more questions. Mark, your question about the handle falling away, falls free. So the handle does not stay engaged on its own. That's because the cam on the handle has worn out, and the little notch in the dog that the cam engages where it pushes against the dog has also worn away. If a rope lock handle cannot stay in a locked position by itself without the use of a ring, that rope lock must be replaced. I would counsel you to take that line set out of commission, lock it out, and replace the rope lock, because it's not gonna help. Scott, should rail op try to engage the rope lock rather than grab the rope at the start of a runaway? Yeah, I mean, if you can engage the rope lock, fine. But that's a momentary situation. You know, throw the lock and then leave. The problem, you know, that happens when the people grab the rope. You know, if it's 200 pounds out of weight, I would venture to say that there's a number of you who are going to take a ride, and nothing good comes of that. Michael, possible test rig for testing rope locks? Well, yeah, I mean, you could, yeah, you could, as Michael is saying here, you could set up a rig. Most of us don't have time or the financial resources to do that, unfortunately. Okay. So that's when you're in a situation Mark Stevens. Work with your people to find something that is appropriate. If it were me and I was in that situation, I would be yelling, clear the stage, and running to do so at the same time. Right. What Mark is saying, I'm only just reading it now. It's not a bad idea, Mark, what you're doing, but I think that your tolerance is a little too far out. Momentum is something that you have to take into consideration here. You may be only 150 pounds out of weight, but you know, the arbor is typically not going to just come to a stop as soon as the legs come off the floor. It'll take a bit because there's momentum there. You know, I wouldn't go to 150 pounds, maybe 100. You know, but you know, this is something again that should be in a controlled situation. You would need to set this up and work with it until you're in a position where it's comfortable, and then use it as a training exercise. So let's take, if you don't mind, what do we got here? 3 o'clock, what do I after 3? I'm just checking my time here. The rope lock clearly is an important piece of equipment. It needs to be adjusted properly all the time. They come out of adjustment. Not, you know, sometimes on the back side here, there's a hex nut that locks this bolt in place. So when you tighten it up, you can physically lock the bolt to stay in place. Doesn't always happen, and it's just a hex nut. Sometimes it loosens up. You gotta keep an eye on it. You gotta check your locks. From an operational standpoint, and this is, I'm preaching to the choir, and I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but we'll run through this little scenario anyway. When you are approaching a line set and you're going to open it up, and the operating lines in a single purchase system, you have 2 lines there, one on the back, one on the front. They're not equally tight. You know, they don't have the same tension in them. The on-stage line, the one right in front of you that's going through that rope lock, is pretty taut. And the one off-stage is slack. You know, you can see it flapping in the breeze. Can somebody tell me what that is an indication of? And Michael Powers, you don't get to, I'm not going to read, you don't get to answer.
That'd be arbor heavy, correct?
That is correct. It is arbor heavy. So the arbor has too much weight based on what's out on the pipe. It is trying to come down there by pulling the rope, the operating rope, kind of pulling it, trying to pull it up through the rope lock. You would never open a rope lock when you have that condition. You would have to check and see what was going on. Now that would mean either having somebody look at the load, the weight in the arbor, see how much weight's in it relative to the weight on the pipe, or at the very least, wrapping the operating lines around each other so that you can use the friction of those wraps to hold the thing in place while you slowly open up the rope lock and see what's going on that way. You know, I wouldn't recommend that for novices. If you're not familiar with the operation, then you have to just stop and investigate. You know, so if the rope on the offstage rope is slack, then the arbor is too heavy. If the onstage rope is slack, then the pipe, your weight out on the pipe is too heavy because it's trying to pull the arbor up. Okay. Yeah, out of weight system, arbor heavy. Okay. So let's take a situation let's take the situation that Mark was just describing, where you got a load of soft goods on the floor that you're going to put on a pipe, and you want to counterweight it. But let's up the ante just a little bit, and let's make that a full mid-stage traveler curtain. You know, weighs about 400 pounds. the weight of the curtain is on the floor. It's not on the system. You may have tied the curtain to the batten or hooked it into the carriers on the track, but that weight, other than what's actually physically hanging from the track or the pipe, it's usually 3 or 4 feet of curtain. The rest of it's sitting on the floor, and terra firma is what's holding that. But it weighs 400 pounds when it gets up off the floor. So you want to put 400 pounds worth of weight over in the arbor. But you have a rope block that only holds 50 pounds. So you're going to have to compensate for that. There are a number of ways of compensating for that. Most of them are wrong, and we'll show you why as soon as I get to it here. Let's go. Oh, that's where I was heading, but I got there a little ahead of myself. Oh, this, by the way, is a counterweight system. This is European. I believe this is UK. So that would be a Hall stage locking rail. I'm pretty sure this is the UK, and it's what they all look like over there. Same basic principle, but a little bit. It's still compressing the rope. They just do it a little bit differently. I like their way better, and that's not because I'm an Anglophile. So you're in an out of balance condition, right? We are. Well, we'll stay here because this is what where we're gonna get. You're in an out of balance condition. You have 400 pounds of stuff tied to the pipe, but it's not attached to the pipe. And you want to put 400 pounds worth of weight into the arbor, but the arbor isn't going to accept it because you have 50-pound capacity before things start to move. The way people typically do this involves this device that it's on the screen here. I'm going to tell you how we use this device, but at the end, I'll throw out the punchline now. This is not the right way to do it. This is a method that is more than a little dangerous. And even though my old friend and colleague, Jay Glarum, used to be a real fan of this particular device, Jay and I were gentlemen, and we, we agreed to disagree in a civilized manner. But that was pretty much before social media anyway. So this line lock or Uncle Buddy is the wrong way to go about it. But I want to walk you through this scenario to give you an idea of why. So if you're in an out of balance condition, curtain on the floor, you want to put 400 pounds of weight in the arbor. The way to control that weight is to take the operating lines, the 2 operating lines, and twist them together. The act of twisting those around each other, the friction created by those twists is what will hold that out of balance condition. Okay, and you can hold a significant amount of weight. I did about 600 pounds once in an out of balance situation with the lines twisted. It wasn't anywhere near as much fun as you might think, and I would not choose to do it again. But I was younger. What can I say? So you twist the lines together. Now, the twisting is what's holding them. So all you want to do is keep the twist from coming undone, from untwisting. And the way you do that is you hold on to it. Just grab the ropes. You twist them together, grab the ropes, everything's fine. Except for the fact that you got people overhead who are loading 400 pounds of weight into the arbor directly above you. You don't want to be there. You want to be in some other time zone while they're doing this work. So you need to find a way to hold the twists in place while they're operating. They're running the line set. They're putting the weight in, and the twists are holding that out of balance condition. This is the line lock. This is a very popular way of doing it, and I'm not sure. And please, anybody who is, if I'm start to struggle with the description, you got a better way of describing it, please jump in here. But the way this works is we have 2 opposing hooks. Here's a hook going in that direction, the other hook going in the other direction. So what you would do is you would place this around the operating line, the twisted operating, both of them, so that both the opposing hooks are now grabbing, one from the front, one from the back. They are now grabbing that the twisted operating lines. When you have done that, this handle and this other hook down here will actually be pointing out in like this direction, right? So what you have to do is you grab the handle, the yellow part, and push, 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 keep pushing until you can get this hook around both of the operating lines this much lower. As anyone who has done this will tell you, it is a royal pain in the butt. It is very, very difficult to do because the friction created by the bend in the rope, when you put these two guys in and then push this guy so that it's now vertical, so the rope is coming down, it's going to come down and do a real bend as it goes through these two guys. It takes all of your focus away from the actual situation, which is the rope. But it's not too bad in the beginning because you're not in an out of balance condition. You're just planning for that. You're just prepping for that. So you get this on here and it will hold. It will hold that 400 pounds out of balance condition. It'll hold a lot more than that, actually. So you've got this on. The people on the loading bridge gleefully throw 400 pounds of weight into the arbor. And now it's time for you to come and remove this and raise the soft goods up in the air. You're 400 pounds out of weight. That's the out of balance condition. These two operating lines that are twisted around each other are screaming at each other because that 400 pounds makes them want to move. Your first function is to get this line lock off the rope. And the only way you can do that, knowing that the tension going through the line, through the rope, is significantly more than it was when you put it on because you've added that 400 pound out of balance condition. You've got to push this guy off stage to get that hook right here to clear the rope. So you got to push, 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 move it off to the side and then hold on to it and hold it back because all it wants to do is spring up into your face, right? Because that's what the line coming down and making that big bend through here is creating. This transfers all of your focus to this device. And none of your focus should be on that device. Your focus should be on the rope. That's the business end of what's going on here. You have a 400 pound out of balance condition, and that's where your focus should be. This is a bad idea for that reason. For another reason, when you do that with that line lock and you're 400 pounds out of balance, you're not making that 400 pounds disappear. You're just holding it in place. It transfers down to the floor block. And the floor block, by design, locks into place when pressure is put on it. But it's not designed to hold 400 pounds worth of pressure. It's designed to hold normal pressure under normal operating situations, roughly 50 pounds or less, and you pull it on the rope. That's what it's designed to do. Now you're going to put 400 pounds on it. It's going to pull up right through the center axis of the sheave itself, of the pulley. It's going to pull up right through here, creating a fulcrum. Note that the axle of the sheave is not centered across the housing of the block. It's on stage. That creates, on purpose, that lock-in fulcrum situation. So now all 400 pounds are pulling up here, and all of that force is transferred to the guide shoes. Remember the conversation we had a little while ago about the Arbor guide shoes not supposed to take any weight? Same deal here. But now you just put 400 pounds. The bearing surface of this guide shoe on the T-track is usually about 3/16 of an inch. If you put too much weight on it, it'll either bend the guide shoe, bend the T-track, or bend both of them, and out it will come. And if you're standing there, the best you can hope for is it'll hit you in the knee. Okay? So this guy is a bad idea. It does its job. It holds the out of balance condition, but it diverts your focus and it diverts the load in a direction that we don't like. What Michael referred to, and this is in a double purchase system. I just realized that. I hadn't looked at it before. But Michael, I think, Michael, the wood stick twisted in the rope. I refer to this as a whiskey stick, but that's another story for a different time. But this stick replaces the line lock that we just discussed. You twist the lines. Now there are 3 lines here because this is a double purchase system, but it's the same for a single purchase system. You twist the lines, and instead of trying to make that whole line lock thing work, you just take a long stick, usually a broom handle. This is an upscale theater. They used a belay pin. And you just stick it in there, and it'll either hit on the rope or it'll hit on the T-bar back here as it tries to untwist, and that hitting will keep it from untwisting. So you're functioning basically the same. Oh, excuse me. You're functioning basically the same. This one is certainly easier to install and easier to remove. You don't lose anywhere near as much of your focus, but it still transfers the weight down to the floor block and creates a failure point on the floor block. It's also a challenge because, when people come in who don't know what's going on here, they haven't encountered this before, and they pull that pin out, well, it's going to spin around and hit them in the face. And that's not going to go. Okay, so I've shown you 2 ways, quickly actually, I've shown you 2 ways that we maintain an out of balance condition. The common factor in both of these ways is that the actual holding method is to twist the lines together. But then we use different methods to keep the twists in place. Neither one of them are very good. If you have to do one or the other of those 2, I would prefer you did this one. But that's just the lesser of 2 evils. What I would prefer you do is a snub knot. And a snub knot, I'm going to walk you through it here in a second about what a snub knot does. I should say I was a little hesitant here for a particular reason, but I say you can't make fun of the drawing at all because my son did the drawing for me. And his mom is on this call. Hi, Sarah. So this is the operating line, right? You're about ready to get in an out of balance condition. So you've twisted the front and the back, the onstage and the offstage lines together. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is you will take a separate piece of rope. Typically it's going to be 6 to 8 feet long, something like that. I usually use a standard industrial double braid for this application. This part of the line is the tail, and this is the standing line, and it's cut off here, but it goes down and it runs off for like 6 feet. So to tie a snub knot, this is where you start. You bring the tail around the twisted line and underneath the standing line. And then you do it again. Now what you're going to do, you're going to bring the tail around underneath the standing line, but it'll be on top of the first wrap. So number 2 wrap, staying underneath the standing line, but on top of wrap number 1. Do it again. Wrap number 3. There's wrap 1, wrap 2, wrap 3, again, underneath the standing line. Let's see if we got another. Right, so he did 3 wraps, and then he put a half hitch on top of the standing line. And that's all you need on the operating rope side. You'll take the standing line and you'll take it down to the locking rail. And you'll tie a clove hitch. I typically prefer to tie a clove hitch around the locking rail. Locking rails are designed to carry a minimum uplift force of 400 pounds per linear foot. So, assuming you're not going to do one of these every foot at the same time, you have significant ability to withstand force, uplift that is being created by that out of balance condition. I know it's a little hard to see, to envision, but it's just you're taking wraps and throwing a half hitch on top and a clove hitch around the rail, and you're good to go. Now you get to walk away. When they load the weights, you come back. All you have to do, you don't even have to look at it. All you have to do is grab this whole knot and pull straight down on it. If you pull straight down, it will slide. When it slides, it loosens up and you can untie it with one hand. So it requires no focus on your part on the knot. You get to put all of your focus on the operating lines, which is where it belongs. And we've also transferred most of the force that's pulling up through the floor block. We've transferred that over to the locking rail where it belongs. Ooh, you have a picture. Where did you find a picture? Oh, yes, okay. Here's a picture of the line knot. I'll get to you in a second, Camille. The big thing that's wrong with this, other than the fact that they use a line lock, is they are using the line lock to hold weight. They did not twist the operating lines. So now the line lock is not only holding the rope in place, it's holding the weight. And it should never, ever, ever, ever do that. You need to twist those lines together so that the rope twist is what's holding the out of balance condition, and the line lock, or whatever device you choose to use, is holding the twists in place, okay? This would be even worse to take off than if it was a twisted line, because while you're trying to take this off, you have to hold on to this thing for all you're worth. You have to get somebody else to help you hold on to it. We're going to run long, folks, if you don't mind. And Judith, yes, it is sort of like a Prusik. Camille, I prefer a double braid. You can get a double braid at a big box store, like Lowe's. But you asked the right question. I don't know. Is there a better source I would recommend? Yeah, me. We sell rope. Okay, and that's the only commercial I'll give you. But yes, we sell rope. And we sell it in whatever length you want. Now, how do I get out of this? Oh, never mind. Come on. Oops. There we are. Okay. So Judith, yes, it is sort of like a Prusik. Okay. So what did I have next here? Oh, I was just about done. Real quick, I want to tell you the story about why I got hit by a counterweight. And then please ask, whatever questions you may have. I was doing an installation in Florida at a small community college, and it had a high ceiling over the stage, but no grid. They had cut the grid out of the design for budget purposes. So when we came into the rigging installation, the whole stage was covered with scaffolding because everybody else was using it, and they decked the whole thing. So we used it to do our rigging installation. And when we were done, and we had pipes on the lines, we were using the counterweight system to lower the scaffolding frame. We were charged with taking the scaffolding down. So I had guys up on the scaffolding right downstage is where we started, right by the proscenium wall. And they started taking apart the frames and the cross braces. This is, construction style. It's not ledgers and standards or anything. It's regular old box frames. And they would, chain them off to the batten, and I would lower it down to the deck. And the guys on the deck would take them off. Then I'd raise the pipe up, and they'd do it again. I wasn't counterweighting for the scaffolding frames. I had wraps on the operating lines, and I was just holding the wraps and lowering it through. Something I should never have done, but I was young and foolish. A gentleman on my crew working upstage of me was retightening the operating lines. This was long enough ago. This is 1979, so that the rope was manila. So that changed. Its length would shrink or stretch at a whim. So his job was to go and retighten all the lines. Well, he undid the rope, and instead of just tightening it, pulling it tight on one line set, he pulled the rope out of the eye on the bottom of the arbor. So now the rope is no longer connected. It also happened to be the line set that we had put a traveler track on that nobody had counterweighted for yet. We were only at pipe weight. So it instantly took off, and he's holding an end of rope in his hand. You can't do anything about it because it's not connected to the arbor. I'm 7 feet, 8 feet downstage of him. I have a twisted operating line in my hand, and I have a fully loaded batten. And all I want to do is run away, but I can't. If I let go of that line, that batten is going to come crashing down with all that scaffolding on it, and it'll probably pull the tower over that my guys are standing on. So in this case, karma is a bitch, and it came around to bite me really quickly. So yeah, the arbor hit the top stop, and a weight came out. And contrary to what Bugs Bunny tells you, on its way down, it does not make a sound. And it hit the floor about 3 feet upstage where I was standing, and bounced and just touched me on the shin as it went by. I didn't walk for several months. And I had a running battle with the surgeon. Remember, this was 1979, and it was Neanderthal medicine in those days. But I had a running battle with the surgeon because they wanted to take my leg off below the knee. Because the counterweight, while not doing much visible damage to my leg, had drilled a hole into my shin bone. And they were concerned that that hole had gotten into the marrow. And if it did, and I got an infection, they would not be able to stop it. So they were going to do a preemptive strike, which fortunately I talked them out of because I think it might have had an effect on my career. So that's a really good reason to not mess with a counterweight system. You want to focus on what is actually going on. You want to focus on the situation at hand. If it's an out of balance condition, you want to stay focused on the parts that are in that out of balance condition, not the rope, the line lock, or the broom handle, or whatever that turns out to be. You want to keep communication open 100% of the time. Nothing should ever move on stage without everybody being told. Oh, and one of my pet peeves, I just remember, one of my pet peeves is I'll hear a fly person yell out, line set 27, moving, and then instantly start to move it. Doesn't wait for a reply and may not get one. The people on the deck need to reply. They need to acknowledge the fact that they heard the fly person yell, and that they acknowledge yes, and they know what's going on. Too many times that doesn't happen. And planning, you need to know start to finish. Especially in this out of balance condition we just described. And there are so many more that are very similar to that. You need to know what is going to happen every step of the way, so that you can tell everybody what's going to happen every step of the way. So when that doesn't happen, they know that the wheels just fell off the bus. Okay, we're a little over time, but I don't really care. How far away from the rail? I have seen, Mark's asking how far away. I have seen counterweight make it to mid stage. When the battens are close to the loading bridge, or there's ductwork over in that area, I've seen counterweight bounce on the ductwork, get out onto the battens, and then it'll bounce around, and you don't know where it's going to go. Judy, good to see you. Thank you. Anybody else have a question, or shall we call it a day?
Bill, I've got a question, and instead of typing it out, I hope you don't mind if I just ask it.
Yeah, go ahead.
We talked about out of weight line sets, in terms of the full stage curtain. Now, what's the best way to lower the curtain all the way to the deck to untie it if it creates that out of balance system?
Well, there's a number of ways to do that. You can put extra people on the operating line, which is a good question, because it brought up something that I didn't mention and I wanted to. Whenever you have more than 2 people on an operating line, you're doing it wrong. You should never have more than 2 people, because 3 people, they're all going to get in the way. I would typically take off some weight, down at the floor. I'd grid the soft goods, take off some weight, let's say we're dealing with 400 pounds worth of out of balance condition. I'd take off 100 pounds, and I'd slowly, through twisted lines, I'd work the soft goods back down to the floor, and then let it start piling up on the floor. And me and my colleague would pull the out of balance arbor up the 300 pounds, knowing that it's not going to be completely out of balance until the curtain is all the way on the floor. 300 pounds is not a challenge to do, and you can get it up to the loading bridge where they can take off the weight. I would also make sure that I had at least 4 people on stage who, when the pipe got into the deck, they would grab it and then they would hold on to it, to make sure that we don't do something stupid by letting go of the rope over at the rail. Is that okay?
Yeah. Then my only other question is that when you're initially taking that first bit of weight off with the arbor all the way in, you don't really have access to the ropes at that point, do you? Because the arbor is right in front of you.
Right.
How do you
twist it around the arbor rod?
Okay, that makes sense. What we currently do is we'll hook a winch to the bottom. We have a winch in our system and a track on the bottom.
See, they never give you the full story when they ask the question, So you have a capstan's winch that you can.
Not a capstan. It's just a standard electric winch.
Okay.
But it does take a long time, and we're okay with it taking a long time.
Right.
We're just looking at the other acceptable ways of doing it.
Right.
So you answered my question. I appreciate it very much.
Sure. Let's see who's next here. Oh yeah, Mark's comment about he's got a mid rail, so he gets to play a little bit better than us mortals here. Jeffrey. Right. Yeah, they don't make sound. Camille, you can sandbag the pipe, sure, if you've got the sandbags there. Typically when we're in a theater, we don't have a lot of sandbags left lying around anymore. So we use human sandbags. And Michael said, yeah, you can rig a temporary line to lift the arbor. You could do that. You could put a block and tackle on it at the floor if you've got an anchorage point, an appropriate anchorage point in the floor, and you could take more weight off and control the rise of the arbor through a block and tackle, whatever the mechanical advantage you have through that block and tackle. The key is maintaining control 100% of the time in a manner that you're comfortable with, that you are familiar with, so that if there is a problem, you recognize it as a problem and know how to handle that problem. I'm sure there's a million things I forgot today, but it's 90 minutes, and I don't know about you guys, it is hotter than hell in this office that I'm in. Oh, we didn't talk about sanitizing either. So those of you who want to hang around for that, hang around. Mark, working in high school, training kids. Operating the line. Okay, operating. We're not loading or anything. And Scott, I'll get to you in a sec. you need to explain the whole system to the students, and they need to recognize the indications when there's a problem, which we, you know, one of the which we talked about, the slack line either on the onstage or the offstage side. High school kids, oh, unfortunately, these are the kids who get hurt the most in this situation. And many schools are now aware of it. They don't allow the kids to run them at all. I'm not of that persuasion. I think the kids should be able to do all of it. Mark, you take them through the entire system, not necessarily physically. You don't, you know, take them up to the roof steel unless you have a grid. But you take them through the whole system so they understand how every bit and piece of it works. And then you start talking about how the operation, you know, working with gravity. You load your scenery or your equipment on the batten first, then you load the arbor. You're going to take the equipment, you're going to strike the equipment, you unload the arbor first, then you unload the batten. Maintaining control of the system 100% of the time is key. Your situation will be different. I'm assuming that you have a regular theater and maybe you don't have a grid, but you got a loading bridge, right? Okay, so you don't have that handicap that a lot of high schools do where they cut out the loading bridge. So, you got to take them through the whole thing. You got to make sure that they understand what the signs are of a poorly balanced system. They need to know when they approach a line set, even if it looks okay, that they don't just unlock a rope lock. They take both the onstage and the offstage operating line and they squeeze them together so that you have a little bit more control because there is friction in that squeezing. And then you open up the rope lock slowly. If the arbor happens to be down, if the pipe has been gridded and you don't have rope and rope, you've got rope and an arbor, then you squeeze the rope to the arbor rod. But as you open up the rope lock, holding the rope together will tell you if there's a problem, because you just have to pull that rope lock off just a little bit and you'll start getting movement. So you have, you know, you have the time to re-engage the rope lock. Scott Aller, what are my thoughts on using chain hoist on extremely heavy loads in the fly system? I'm assuming you're talking about putting a chain hoist at the floor and attaching it to the floor and to the bottom of the arbor. Is that what we're talking about?
That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. Typically, however, the geography doesn't work out very well because you don't have a lot of room to get the chain hoist into the space, and where you want to anchor the chain hoist is directly under the arbor, but there's usually nothing to anchor to. You know, somebody put a screw eye into the floor or something, you know, which isn't going to do it for you. You could anchor it to the locking rail, but then if you're bringing the arbor down close to the locking rail, you're going to pull it right out of the T-bar. I'm not a big fan, you know. I would do it with a block and tackle. If I was going to use any kind of a mechanical advantage, I would use a block and tackle. I have better control, you know, because I can feel what's going on in my hands rather than just pushing a button.
Right. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it and heard about it being done in a couple different venues, even though I haven't been directly involved.
Mm-hmm.
One of the venues actually has a bar installed at the bottom directly under the arbors for that purpose.
Oh, good. Well, then, you know, they've thought about it and they've taken the appropriate steps to make it work for them, you know.
But you're right. Getting the hoist in position is definitely a difficult scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Michael. A capstan winch would be great, but they're about $6,000. Okay. I forget who it was who asked me, and I apologize for not remembering, but I was asked about how to, in these days of COVID-19, sanitize a locking rail, fly rail system. And the reality is that you can't sanitize the system. You have to sanitize the people who are using the system. I mean, there's just too many parts for you in the system, and you would need many gallons of sanitizer of some sort. Which is not to say that you shouldn't do that, but I think your focus wants to be on the operators. You have to set up your system first of all that the operators are they're tested or they've been quarantined, whatever. We know that they're not sick. And that's the first step. They should work on very specific sections of the rail. They should not overlap. I mean, maybe you need an extra couple of people, but one person does line sets 1 through 6. The other person, next person does 6 through 14, on down the rail, and they don't overlap. They don't switch over. The social distancing thing is a problem. Excuse me. If somebody one person needs to move line set 6 because it's in his or her zone, and the next person needs to move line set 7 because it's in their zone at the same time. I would think in this day and age that you would take the steps to correct that problem so you did not have to do that. You would not want people working right next to each other. You should be able to find a way to avoid that situation. But I think that relying on cleaning a rail is not a real good application of your resources. Cleaning the people, everybody should work in gloves. I hate working in gloves, but yeah, you should be working in a glove, disposable gloves that you get rid of. Everybody certainly should be working in masks. But in terms of getting the locking rail, you can give it a shot, but I don't think you're going to be successful. You need the people to be clean. Does that help? He may not even be here still. I just realized that I can't see anybody, so I may be talking to myself. Nope, there's 27 of you left. Okay. Any other questions? Well then, I think we've reached the end. Thank you all so much. For those of you who are thinking about next week, we will open up registration at 10 o'clock on Friday. Hello, Casey from Alaska. Good to see you. Oh, Canada made it. Cool. Thank you. Good to see you from Dubai. Yeah, 10 o'clock on Friday, we will open up registration for next week's festivities, and we will be talking about self-retracting devices. And if you think that sounds like a really boring subject, you're probably right. Anyway, have a good afternoon, and when it comes around, have a good weekend, and thank you all for joining me. Take care. Have a good day.